Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's session on COVID-19 and the impact on higher education. My name is Jeff Scott, and I'm the CEO of Section 810 Communications. We're a training and development firm based in the New York City area, and I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome our guest from MIT, Heidi Pickett, in just a moment. Before we do that, just a couple of housekeeping items for those of you that are new to our series. Because of the nature of the audiences we have and the sizes, we have about 13 different countries represented today. Everyone's line is on mute. However, we do want to give you the opportunity to interact with us, and you'll notice in your control panel, you've got the ability to ask questions of the staff in the chat and questions area. Feel free to use that throughout the presentation to ask questions of Heidi and myself. And at the end of the presentation, we'll take a look at those questions and provide answers out loud or some through writing. You also can find information on Section 810 Communications and MIT's Master Finance Program and their Finance Lab in the handout section in the control panel you have as well. Now, just to make sure that everyone can see and hear us okay, because it's a terrible thing to do a webinar when no one can hear you, if you can see the slide that we have, and you can hear my voice clearly, please go ahead and raise your hand. You'll see an icon in the form of a hand in your control panel. So go ahead, I'll give you a moment just to find that, raise your hand. Outstanding. Looks like everybody can hear and see us, so that is terrific. So while Heidi and I bring our cameras on screen, I'll take an opportunity to introduce our special guest today. Heidi Pickett is the Assistant Dean at MIT Sloan School of Management and heads the Masters of Finance program. She's been with MIT for almost 10 years now, and I've had the privilege of knowing Heidi for about 6 years through my participation at MIT with a previous employer. Heidi, it's an absolute delight to have you here. Thank you for joining the session.
Thank you, Jeff. My pleasure to be here. And I am so thrilled that there are 13 countries represented in the attendees today. That's fantastic. This is definitely a global topic, so it's great to have a global participant.
No, it definitely is, and certainly these are crazy times. As we at Section 810, we've been going through the webinar series. This is number 7 in our free webinars that we're going through, and today's is really interesting because it affects a diverse group of people. We're going to do a poll in just a minute, but students are affected by what's happening in higher education. Of course, parents, as you and I well know, employers and recruiters, and also people within academia. So as we go through the presentation today, we want to talk about those 3 different areas. How has this pandemic affected the educational system itself, including faculty? What about recruiters and employers? And then we'll get into a little bit more the student section on that. So as with all of our webinars, we'll keep it interactive. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you with our cup of coffee here. And to the audience, again, feel free to ask questions as we go through the presentation. So as we get in, the first thing I'd like to do is do a quick poll. And what we'd like to find out is who's on the session with us. So what I'd like you to do is take a look at the poll that's coming across on your screen now and provide a response. Are you a student, an employer, parent, educator, or other? Curious to see who's in the room with us right now. So I'll give just a moment to go through that. Heidi, you and I represent a couple of these different buckets with children ourselves, and also being in higher education for you, and I spend certainly a number of years doing recruiting. So just another moment here, and then we'll close it down. Great, so we'll shut it down there. So just so everyone can see what the breakdown is, we've got a 27% of you are students, 40% employers, 7% parents, 7% educators, and 20% other. Rough numbers there. So that's great. Thank you for doing that. We certainly appreciate, and we'll be going through several polls just to get an idea of the audience here. So Heidi, when we think about way back in March, which feels like eons ago, when did this start affecting MIT?
Well, well before March, for sure. So thinking back, gosh, This goes back to probably the last week of January when it really started to impact MIT, myself, my program, which is a Master of Finance program. So MIT has a winter break during January. Our fall term doesn't start till the first week in February. So I had 30 students returning from winter break from China who all made it into the country before there was the executive order to close the borders. But that meant they needed to self-isolate for 14 days. We did not see this coming. We were not planning on this. This was all new. We were just, I felt like kind of living minute by minute, trying to figure it out and put processes in place to identify who were the students that traveled back, what day did they arrive to campus, when was that 14-day up, who were they living room, who else may they be in contact with, how do we give them the food and resources, and then of course they're here at MIT for an education. So luckily, many of our classrooms within the Sloan School, which is where my program is housed, has that kind of flick of the switch capability where all the rooms are accommodated with recording capabilities. So we were able to get recordings to the students from day one. So nobody got left behind from the academics, but it was something that we were not anticipating. And looking back, it seemed kind of challenging and like kind of hectic in the time, but wow, that was just the beginning. And I didn't know what was coming after that.
I can only imagine, and I know, especially with such a large number of international students, you start to wear a lot more hats. Now you're becoming almost a caregiver, and making sure that people are okay beyond just the educational component.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just making sure that they were safe, that they were healthy, they felt supported. How do we get food to their rooms, because they were not supposed to leave their rooms. So it was definitely an eye-opening experience, and I'm glad it started on that small scale, because it certainly helped us, build up to when it got much worse than that.
When you said you had that flip of the switch, so you could record and give students the opportunity still to engage in the learning, what's your perspective on the academic performance? If you compare that to last year's group of students, do you feel like the level of education was at the same par?
Yes, so great question. And, MIT is a data-driven university, and I wish I had the data today, but we're still collecting that data through focus groups and surveys and trying to really evaluate. And I think, something will be coming out on that. But I mean, anecdotally, that 14-day quarantine back in like the start of fall term, not a major impact. They got the recordings, they were still able to connect and do the student projects and then come back into the classroom. I think the bigger change is when we need to go 100% online for the last half of spring term. And that's where the question's really, is it the same learning experience? And you can't replicate an in-classroom learning experience simply taking the syllabus and what you're doing in the classroom and just, putting it online and it's a go. We needed to take a step back. Luckily, MIT has been at the forefront of online education. You're probably familiar with our open courseware platform. We also have the collaboration with Harvard, and we have our edX platform. So, online education has been in our system for 20 years. So we had a lot of in-domain expertise that we literally pulled together and made an available resource for all of our in-residence teaching faculty, some of which had produced courses for our online. So, that was a good complement there. But many of our faculty had not taught online. So it was really, and let me just say, we had 2 weeks to do this. So mid-March, when we're like constantly just, monitoring the situation, which, very fluid, like information is changing, daily, if not more quickly. You never know what's real, what's not real, where really is this going? But eventually we were able to make this decision and had to make the decision that basically a week before spring break, we basically said, no more classes, undergrads, you need to leave campus. So they would get an extra week off before their spring break. That gave our faculty technology and staff 2 weeks to basically, bring the rest of the semester, which was 6 weeks, online. And that really started with, what are the learning outcomes? What do students need to learn? Because we can't compromise the academic experience just because we're going online. It needs to have the rigor that is expected of MIT and expected of our students. So really looking at what are the learning outcomes, and then figuring out what are the online tools that we can use. How do you, it's not just, in some cases it was just, you can lecture away and,
Right.
try to engage using, different technologies, whether it's polling or breakouts and this and that and whatever. So, the technology is there, but, not every learning outcome may be able to be accomplished, going to an online. So you gotta,
No,
you gotta
that's true. In fact, you said that it's online learning is not just taking traditional education and putting it on an online platform. It's a different animal. And I think this pandemic has showed so many of us in different industries that we often need to make quick decisions without all the information that we would like, with what we'd be comfortable with. So you've had to make those changes, and I think that distinction is really important. What about summer? This, I believe, is the first time that MIT is doing a completely online semester. So talk about that. What were some of the changes you made to prepare for that?
Right. Yes. So, So I'm aware of 3 degree programs at MIT that start between June 1st and July 1st. So my program starts July 1st, and we have a full class coming in. And so, our class is typically around 120 students from all over the world. And this is the first time that we're going to have to do this completely virtually. So, again, academics is, first and foremost. And so we started with, what does the academics look like? Again, what are their learning outcomes? What is the content that they need to do? Knowing that we have students in 30 different countries and multiple time zones. And that synchronous learning experience is so important because of the dialogue in the classroom, where it's not just one-way delivery of the faculty teaching the students. They learn just as much from the students learn just as much from each other. So the very first thing we did was calling together our summer term faculty team, who are amazing to work with, and were really flexible and open-minded. And we completely said, okay, blank sheet of paper, let's just start with when are we going to actually offer classes? What's the time zones that we think we can get the most students across all of the time zones, from West Coast to South America to Asia to everything in between, into the classroom all together? So, normally our faculty don't like to teach 9 a.m. classes in residence. I have them going to be teaching starting at 8 a.m. We're shorting our classes for online. Normally they go 3 hours a day for a class, 5 days a week, which, just to put it in perspective, 3 hours in one day is the equivalent to a full week of classes during a regular term. This is how intense our summer term is. So to do this online is going to be no small feat for sure. But we'll be doing bigger breaks, shorter sessions, bigger breaks. We've been able to extend the calendar a little bit because of a late Labor Day. That actually worked in our favor, so we were able to get an extra week to work with. We know Zoom burnout is a real thing. So, in residence, you get 10 minutes to leave your class and get to the next class. We're giving them 30 minutes, even though they don't need to travel anywhere, but to stand up, shut off that video, shut off that audio, and just, do what you need to do to regroup. So, yes. So we've really changed the structure. We're also going to be doing some pretty innovative things around the teaching too. So it is not stand-up lectures the entire time with maybe a little bit of interaction. Some of our faculty are going to be experimenting with doing short, high quality, high production video snippets, if you will, or little modules, showing a 7-minute module and then talking through what did you learn in that module. Now let's do a practice example. We have all the technology in play with our faculty and TAs around the proper laptop with the with the iPad and all the technologies to connect so you can simulate writing on a whiteboard, doing real problems, you know, with the Apple Pencil. So I don't mean to be doing Apple products right now, but
No,
but that's what we're doing. And then recitations will be offered in multiple time zones because we're basically taking all the morning prime time, Eastern time, to make it available for synchronous learning around the world. We can't do that with recitations, so we'll have 2 sets of live recitations in the afternoon, in the early evenings, and
that makes sense.
We'll hope. Yeah.
I want to, in a moment, just talk about plans for the fall, because I know there's a lot of planning that's been going on with that. But before we do that, talk about the faculty for just a minute. You mentioned Zoom burnout, and I know because so many of us are living by Zoom, and we did a webinar about 3 or 4 weeks ago on effective remote communication and dealing with the whole concept of being home, being on Zoom. What about faculty? My daughter is a teacher, but elementary school level. And it was her first year teaching, and she was telling me, Dad, this is challenging because I'm used to having all my kids in my classroom, and now I'm trying to have one-on-one time with them, academically, socially, in different areas. Talk about the faculty. How have they been responding, or what advice would you have? Because I know we have folks from within academia that are on the session today. What are some best practices from your standpoint?
Yeah, I wish I had the magic bullet. I don't. You know, our faculty are just really trying to, again, all videos must be turned on for our students, assuming the connections work, really trying to use as much of the interactive technology as possible to have that discussion and to hear students and to hear what they're thinking, as opposed to that one-way delivery. You cannot go to one-way delivery. I know our faculty really struggle with, like, how do you, it's much harder to gauge the interest and the attention span on, you know, all these little pictures as opposed to being in the classroom. So I know they struggle with that. They know they need to step it up a notch. They just can't do the same thing. They've got to make it interesting, and they know if it's interesting online, then the students will be there, they will be engaged. But I think it's, you know, really like the more you can engage and create that sharing of information, that seems to be what's resonating best from our faculty having fun with this experience, and what is resonating with the students and what I'm hearing. And just, but you know, one-way lecture isn't really cutting it. Pre-recorded videos followed by a discussion, not really cutting it. You got to make it interactive. And
yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that's for the benefit of the faculty, as you said, as much as the students, because at the end of the day, we all need that connection. We'll talk a little bit more about connection as we move ahead. So let's talk about fall semester. I'm just moving ahead into a slide that you had provided. You mentioned to me that you've got a planning committee. You're looking at a lot of variables. And again, the data is not conclusive. Talk about the way of thinking, and then let's talk about some of the other schools that you and I have discussed and their decisions for fall and beyond.
Right. So yeah, so some schools, at least what I'm hearing anecdotally and what I've been reading in the papers, have started to make what seems to be official decisions. Whether, you know, I read University of Cambridge in the UK is not opening at all for fall term, so that will be all in person. I think some of the California State Universities the same is what I read. You have I heard just yesterday Tulane, and this is anecdotally, so it's not confirmed, but they'll be doing a early start and getting their students to campus earlier than normal for fall term, so that they then in turn can stop early, basically Thanksgiving break, send them home, and not have them return. That, you know, I don't want to state the obvious, but just so, you know, the thinking around that is just, you don't want your students flying all over the world and, like, you know, then coming back to campus with like, who knows what they, you know, who they came in contact with. And it's flu season on top of it all. So it's just going to exacerbate everything that we're, you know, that we've been trying to control.
Yes.
So
I think Boston College has taken the same approach too, aren't they, with the starting early and letting them go home by Thanksgiving. And I even heard that Cambridge in the UK is not only stopping the fall semester on campus, but even through the spring. I don't know if that's a definitive or not, but that's a long-term decision that may have already been made.
A long-term decision, and we don't know what spring is. I don't think MIT is going to take a position on spring. We seem to, take it term by term based on, the most up-to-date information we have. This slide here is very simplified in terms of what we're thinking about. But just to say, it's not just kind of the status of like who's infected. It's just there's so many factors, and it's where are the medical advances in play? Do we have good testing? Do we have a way to test? Can we get all our students tested? Are our buildings ready from just even, do we have the right maintenance procedures in place? Have we removed chairs and reconfigured common spaces to allow for proper social distancing? So many different things. And then what does that mean from like, how can we open campus safely, and to what extent can we open campus? And right now we're fully closed with a little bit of pilots taking place, particularly to try to get some of our labs open, where students who need access to labs for their to complete their academics. That is what we're experimenting right now with. In terms of fall, this slide, so green would be the best of all worlds. We are in person, back in session, everybody's on campus, and life is back to business as usual. Realistically, that's probably not going to happen. The other end of the spectrum is the red virtual, and if we have to remain closed and 100% virtual, that's going to create just a lot of unhappy students, but a lot of issues around immigration, which we might talk about in a little bit as well.
Right.
Where I think we'll end up is somewhere in the middle here in this yellow zone. And we used to be at like 7+ different scenarios with like, we had mixed, flexed, we had so many names. Now we're down to blended, hybrid, high flex. And I don't know, we may start considering this early start, early close as well, but we're not there yet. But basically blended for us, what that means is we're going to be pretty much open and classes will be in session, but we also know at the same time that because of immigration, students aren't going to get visas to get here, and because of travel restrictions, students may not be able to get here.
Right.
Simply by that, we're going to have less students on campus, even if we're fully open. So we're going to have a blended classroom where we know students are going to be in the classroom, but everything's going to have to be recorded and offered. Hopefully students can participate synchronous, but time zones, it's going to have to be, we're going to have to do an asynchronous model as well that doesn't negatively impact our students. Hybrid is, campus is open. We're anticipating that the majority of students will be able to be on campus. However, that's probably too many students than our campus, particularly classrooms and dorms, can accommodate. So figuring out, maybe group A goes to class in the classroom on Mondays, and group B goes to the same class on Wednesdays, and then alternatively they're online from their classroom or their dorm or wherever they live. Some classes may be 100% online, if that makes sense. Some classes, if they're smaller in nature or required, maybe they have that lab element, maybe they're going to be 100% live because of those factors, and some maybe just sort of a mix. High flex, which is hybrid flexible, that is basically really up to the student, giving students the option. So if you want to attend in class one day, sure. If you want to attend from home one day, sure. But it's all about flexibility based on how does the student feel comfortable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I know a couple of my kids that are in school right now have been taking online classes out of choice rather than being on campus. So a lot of university systems, including MIT, were already prepared for this, but that high flex makes sense because you're right. I think there's going to be some flexibility in there, especially as you mentioned with students coming internationally with some of the travel restrictions and visa issues we have in place right now for sure. Let's do this, Heidi. I know when we talked, we wanted to get an idea of what the audience's perspective is as far as when should schools open back up again, especially in terms of if there's a vaccine. So let's take a look at another poll here. If everybody could take a look at what we've got there and take a moment just to answer, are you concerned if schools, and that could either be K-12 or universities, open before a vaccine? You know, either yes, you're concerned and you really want things closed until there's a vaccine. At the other end of the spectrum, you're not concerned at all and you want campuses to open, or are you maybe a little bit concerned, but you're okay with campuses opening as long as there are some other safeguards, whether it's social distancing or testing or things like that. So let's give that a moment here.
This is really interesting and something we talk about constantly at MIT.
Yeah, I believe it. And again, as a parent, I think through these things. As an employer in the past, going on campus and doing things, and we're going to transition just a moment to talk about some recruiting issues. I'm just looking at the time. I think you and I could talk for a week about this. There's so many really relevant topics. All right, let me close the poll here. So interesting numbers. 25% of you said that you are concerned and don't want campuses to open until a vaccine is in place. 75% said you're in the middle. You're slightly concerned, but you're okay opening it if there are some safeguards. And none of you are feeling like I'm completely good as is. Let's just go ahead and open the gates. So that's interesting. And again, thank you for responding to the poll there. Heidi, let's transition over. Several years ago, when you and I first met, I was working in the quantitative finance industry and did a lot of work up at MIT recruiting and participating in career fairs and in the great networking events you would do in the MFin program. Let's talk about this just a little bit, because what's this going to look like when fall comes, in your opinion?
Well, I know it's going to look virtual. Yeah, decisions have been made, not only at MIT, but across many of our peer schools, that recruiting will be virtual. And it's actually, this is where I think there's actually going to be some opportunity, because it creates a much more level playing field for companies and for students as well. I think it's going to create new opportunities. It's going to create the level playing field. So we're definitely going to be 100% virtual. I don't think we're going to have any visitors on campus, whether they're recruiters or otherwise, during the fall. So that's one of the drivers. But we also foresee that, you know, travel budgets could be cut. There could be travel restrictions within the employers that, you know, they're not going to want them to be coming to, particularly to a university with all these students. And so we're going to have to be creative, and it's going to go virtual. But, you know, we see a new way of collaborating with more companies, not just the large ones who have traditionally come to campus, but this really opens up to bring in new and innovative small to mid-sized firms, to startups who didn't have the budgets, the staff to take time to come to campus to interact for maybe that one key hire. So this really is going to create an interesting opportunity to you know, to be able to introduce your company through a webinar info session that you're going to get a much broader audience. Traditional or historical companies who didn't want to come because they couldn't get maybe the conversion out of MIT students, yet we know there are some MIT students who want to work for these firms. That gives them another opportunity to come back in at a low cost and hopefully high impact. We'll be able to do a lot of asynchronous content too, so it allows even much more flexibility and also creates that level playing field for our students who are going to be in different time zones. And we're going to be very cautious about, you know, not having the, you know, XYZ, whoever the premier firm is, you know, delivering in a time zone that half of our students aren't able to participate. So it's going to give us a lot of new flexibility. We're actually excited about this part. You know, we're still figuring it out. We don't have all the answers. I don't think employers have all the answers in terms of like, how are you going to evaluate, and, you know, can you evaluate equally as good over Zoom? I think you can. You know, we just interviewed the majority of our students coming into our incoming class using Zoom, where normally we're face-to-face. So I think the technology is at a point where we can do this effectively. Banks have, for a long time, have been using online screening tools already. So some of these practices are already in place. The career,
go ahead,
yeah.
Heidi.
Well, no, I was just going I was going to go into the career fairs, which I think is a little bit more challenging. We've played with it a little bit, and I'd love your perspective because I know that you participate in a career fair. I don't think we're going to be able to recreate the big giant MIT career fair with lots of swag, and it's just so fun to walk through and the energy. But I think there are other ways that we're going to be able to get a lot of companies in front of our students and a lot of our students in front of those companies.
Yeah, I would agree. And I like what you said about the level playing field, because that's so true. Having participated in career fairs where, as an organization, maybe spending a substantial amount to get good positioning and good location versus going in and testing the waters in some. And I remember being in one situation with a company name that happened to start with a letter later in the alphabet, and the distribution of employers was alphabetically, and we were in the locker room somewhere. We didn't even have that good location, and it can be very expensive. So leveling the playing field, absolutely, it gives employers an opportunity. I've got a lot of experience working at virtual events, virtual information sessions, holding competitions. You know, we've done some things in conjunction with MIT in the past. There are some creative ways that organizations can look for students more than just a traditional career fair to do that. There's a lot of great technology platforms, not just Zoom, but things like vFair and InExpo and iVent that are focused on just larger virtual events with breakout rooms and auditoriums and things that companies can use. In fact, I've even participated in the past as a recruiter with virtual events that were multi-university. There may have been a dozen or 2 dozen universities, and students were able to go into various chat rooms, if you will, and deliver their resume and schedule time to meet with recruiters. That technology does exist. And while you don't get, in some ways, maybe the same feel of shaking someone's hand, the reality of the new business normal is we don't do it anyway. Because when you start working, and I have friends that have started with new positions and they haven't even physically met the people that they're working with. This is the new norm, and the technology does exist to support it.
Right. Like I said, we're excited. And what I would say to our employers that are participating today, I don't know if you've recruited at MIT before or not, but I would say it is fair game and open territory for anybody who wants to come hire our talent. We welcome you. So we're not turning away anyone, and we're happy to work with, from the smallest startup to the largest of all firms. But we're ready and looking forward to an innovative recruiting season that I think will be quite successful.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience. Your career development department in Sloan and MIT in general is amazing, great to work with, and always looking for new ideas of connecting students and employers. So for those of you on the line that are recruiting, I encourage you absolutely continue to build that relationship. That's really the most important thing. Build the relationship and look to solve the problem. Whether you become a partner, provide content that can be used in a practicum, something that you can actually be a part of the solution. I encourage that.
Right.
So Heidi, let's transition over. First of all, before we do that, for those that may have joined a little bit late, thank you for joining us. There is information that you'll find under the handout section of your control panel on MIT's Master Finance program, on their finance lab, and of course on Section 810 communication and some of the training offerings that we provide. Feel free to take a look at that and ask questions. As we continue to go through, we have one more section we want to discuss that has to do with more on the student side of things. But if you have questions, type them in. Heidi and I will be looking at those in just a couple of minutes. So Heidi, quick poll. For those that are on the call that are actively involved as an employer or as a recruiter, let's take a look. I'm curious to see if you're in that category. Talk about your changes. Have you had significant changes in your plan and maybe in particular your budget as far as recruiting? No change from last year? Is everything just going to still be as is? Or are you going to go ahead and hold on right now and not sure? Heidi, it's funny, you and I talked a few times and said, you know, we've got more questions than we do answers right now. I do, you do,
Yeah.
society, we do, and certainly higher education. But I'm curious to see how the employers and recruiters are looking at this. Give it just a couple more seconds. Have you made significant changes, no change, or still waiting for some information?
I would love to. I'd love to know more about the 20% or now 33% that have significant changes in plan and budget. I guess the budget makes sense, just given, you know, everything that's happening right now in the economy. So that's, but I would love to hear about changes in the plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And for those of you that responded to that, feel free to put in the questions area if you'd like to share something of what you're doing. When we look at the questions, we can take a look at that as well. So please communicate with us that way. So for the audience, it was an even split. 33% across the board said either significant changes, no change, or still waiting for information and the jury's still out. That's great. Good information. Once again, thank you for participating in the poll.
Mm.
So let's move into the third area of today's discussion. I'm watching the time, about 15 minutes till our scheduled close time. And just for the audience, we do try to close out the sessions on time or within a few minutes as a courtesy for those that need to move and do other things. I know often people don't want to drop off if they think it's going to be disruptive. It won't. But at the end of the day, we'll try to wrap up right at noon Eastern time. However, Heidi and I will stay on. If you've got questions, we'll shut down the phone line and video, but you can continue to type questions and we'll communicate with you that way. But as I looked at this photograph and I said, okay, not many people in the picture, you gotta look close. And I'm sure this is what MIT is looking like. I haven't been to Cambridge in a bit, but I know campuses overall are empty right now. So let's talk about the impact as far as students and family. There's a lot of things that are affecting them. First of all, what do you feel their perspective is on the effectiveness of a virtual learning environment? Do you think the students are saying, I'm good, I'm getting the same level of education?
So I would say, and a lot of this is anecdotal from just having lots of one-on-one conversations with my students following the second half of spring term when it was online. And I would say the majority, not 100%, the majority said that they felt the faculty really stepped it up. They felt like they learned what they needed to learn and that it was, and they got the material, they feel ready, they're excited to go off to their internships and start, or full-time, and start using those skills they learned. I think it's not a question about is the learning as effective. I think MIT, and again, you know, given our 20 years of history in online learning, that certainly played to our benefit. I don't want to speak to other schools, but, you know, I think I was a little disappointed with my daughter's university in terms of how they transitioned. So I think it varies from university to university. So I'm only going to speak specific to MIT, but I do believe that, you know, we can deliver the same rigor that our students and employer partners expect. I think it's the other part that is really hard to replicate, that, you know, students come to an in-residence program not just to be in the classroom, but you know, for all of the other social and networking and community building and everything else you experience being on campus. And the jury's still out.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know you and I chatted about that for a bit before the session. You've got a new cohort coming in July. Yeah. What's the thought process? You know that the summer is going to be a completely virtual academic experience. What about that sense of community? I've met with your students and there is a nice camaraderie between them. And that's, I think, part of the educational process. How are you going to build that sense of community starting July 1st?
Yeah, so we've been able to do that traditionally in a three-day intense orientation, where it is like you're in MIT and now you're gonna dive into the deep end, and you all come out, you know, in this like unified community that just continues to build, you know, throughout. We don't have the luxury of 3 full days when it's virtual. So we're basically blank sheet of paper, similar to the academics. What are the outcomes that we want to achieve? what are the connections we want to make within, personal to personal within our students, but also the students to me, my colleagues, to the rest of MIT, to faculty, with fun things, but also, the things they need to know before they go into that classroom on July 6th. Classroom norms and communications, how to do case studies. There's going to be a mix of that. Rather than trying to do it in 3 intense days, we're doing now a full month onboarding throughout June in little pieces. Okay. And I don't want to use the words baby feed or spoon feed, but it's going to be, we're going to be building on it. And we've started this week and trying to accommodate hours where most people are available. We're recording everything. We're going to have a library of resources that people can go and see what they missed or maybe watch it again. And I have to go back to one thing about the education piece. One thing that our students actually really enjoyed about having everything recorded, for those who didn't pick something up in the classroom, or maybe they were like zoomed out, and like a lot of them actually went back and rewatched the videos or certain section of the videos, and they said that was like really like a great part of the experience, that they were able to get. They felt like extra faculty attention even just watching the videos. But anyway, I digress. But we have a bunch of fun things, new things. We are creating a student committee that are going to be our capital builders to help build social capital across their class. So we're going to have to engage students much more than we've had before. We were basically like, here's your orientation, but we're going to need buy-in, and some things aren't going to work. And let me just tell you now, some things we're going to do are going to be complete failures, and that's okay. We're going to go on to our next big idea, and if it works, we're going to repeat it.
And that makes sense.
I think it's really important for anyone, whether parent or a student who is either returning or maybe just starting out, you just have to say, like, you can't take what has been traditional in the past and expect it to be the same going forward.
Right.
It's going to be different no matter what. You can't replicate it. But what you can ask questions or hope is that whatever this new experience is, that you can be a part of it. Like, I want my students to be pioneers in like this whole new, like, never been done before. And I want them to feel proud and feel just as much ownership as I do in terms of having a great experience and a great start to their journey ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I think we're finding, and I know we've seen this, is there is no one size fits all approach. I mean, one of the things that we do at Section 810 is we do training on self-awareness through DISC personality assessments. And with that, what is your inherent strength, and what's your communication style? What's your social need? Some people are very, very happy. In fact, we did a webinar about a month ago on this, and we had representations from a D, I, S, and C area. And some people said, this is a dream for me because I'm alone and I can focus all the time. And the other person said, yeah, it's a dream for me too, but it's a nightmare because I don't get to see people. Right. Students, I think, are the same way. Some just enjoy that energized element of being around other people, whereas others are so task oriented and they're fine sitting down with their computer and doing their work alone. So I'm sure you're going to see some of that in the students' response.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But even before our webinar today, I took part in one of our very first, we called it an ice-breaking session. So it was the first time I got to have some one-on-one conversations with our incoming students, and they're excited. So whether it's virtual or on campus, they're excited to join the program, and my goal is to keep that excitement going and throughout the entire summer. And I know there's going to be some low points, but we're going to celebrate the high points, and that's all we can do right now. It's just, you can't expect more of yourselves or those around you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Let's do this, Heidi. We got about 8 minutes left in our scheduled time. I know we want to go through a quick poll, and this is an interesting one because we want to see what people's tolerance level is, if for lack of a better word, regarding testing and checking. So there's a few different options. And this, again, if you're a student or even a recruiter or a parent, if you take a look at the universities, do you think that they should require temperature checks, actual testing, or tracing? And there's all different levels. Some people I know say, I'm okay with temperature checks because that's pretty non. Others may say testing and temperature checks are good, but tracing, not at all. And of course, some are going to say, I don't know. So take a moment and just take a look at those answers, and let's take a quick look to see what the response is. Give that just a few seconds here.
I love this question, and this is something that we're grappling with at MIT. How do you implement it, number one? And, certainly the tracing, is very controversial.
Yes. Absolutely. And again, I think about this, you've got a rising senior in university. I've actually got 2 kids that are in school this summer and 4 that'll be in school starting in the fall. So I think the same thing. If you're going to be on campus, what's that going to be like? What am I comfortable with? Okay,
Right.
Let me go ahead and close this down. So going through the responses, and again, thank you all for participating in the polls today. 54% of you said, yeah, we want to go ahead and get all of these, testing, tracing, and temperature checks. 8% said temp only. Another 8% said testing and temperature checks. 15% said no, not at all, don't want any of that. And another 15% of you are uncertain. Again, just like Heidi, you at MIT are uncertain of some of these things. Very interesting, a very broad group of answers there. Again, thank you all for responding to those polls. So let's take a look, Heidi, at some of the questions. I know we actually have a couple that we want to ask out here. Bear with me as I'm looking to the side. I'm just taking a look at some of the questions on a larger screen. And let's take a look. Well, one of them is questions from a parental standpoint. What kind of questions? And Heidi, you were kind enough to put together some questions that I've got on screen here for people to see. As a parent, what should you be asking? What are some of the things? And it's not that we have all the answers to these, but as parents, we also want to ask some of these questions. What is it going to look like in dorms? What about visitors? You mentioned MIT. I didn't know this. Even if you do that green light in the fall for on-campus classes, no visitors, no career fairs, that's all going to be off limits. So it's interesting. So these are just some general thoughts and questions. Let's take a look at a couple that we have here. One is, do you see the recruiting process being fully virtual as the new standard from now on, beyond just COVID-19 vaccine being available? Owana, that's a great question. So we know that at MIT, fall's going to be virtual only. What's the general figure? Has this even been discussed as far as entering a new norm, or is that not even being discussed from an MIT standpoint, Heidi?
From an MIT standpoint, we're really just trying to get through fall. Actually, I'm trying to get through summer term, and clearly focused on fall. We think about spring, but not to the extent about what does recruiting look like at that point. And I love that question though, because I think there will be some resulting changes to the way that we do business, not just in higher ed, but across the board. Like, we now know technology works, working from home works, and we're still able to connect, across countries and time zones. So I don't think it will ever go back to 100%, in person. Maybe there will be a mix. I think people do like to come to campus and visit and meet, together. So I hope some of that comes back in, but I don't think it's an all or nothing. It's not a go back to the way it was. But I'm not sure we stay 100% virtual either. But how long it takes for us to get to whatever the end state is, I don't know.
That might be your hybrid or high flex, might be in one of those categories. As a previous recruiter, I can say that while the campus experience is good in some cases, career fairs can be overwhelming. I remember specifically being on campus at MIT or at other schools and being inundated with sometimes 200 or 300 students in a 4-hour period, and coming out with a stack of resumes this thick. It's challenging to do that.
Yeah.
And so some of these virtual events that may be staggered out instead of that one big hit of a career fair in October, it may be beneficial to do that. And hybrid may be the best way. On campus, it can be great to do some things.
Yeah.
And I know with so many employers, it's hard for everybody to get a chance to be on campus to do something live. But I do think that in this whole process, we're learning and developing best practices of things that might stick.
Yeah.
I think back to a webinar we did about a month ago. Mike Diadio was with me as a guest, and we were talking about leadership in crisis. And we were talking about the paradigm shifts in the business world. As an example, some organizations are saying, we're not renewing our office lease. We're not allowing people back in the office until minimum of September, but in some cases, January. And now people are saying, we're just going to work from home more. We're going to stagger the office. We are developing new normals. And I think, again, great question. I don't think we're going to know for a while, but I think a hybrid may be the most effective way to do it going forward, from my perspective.
One thing that I have been hearing a little bit too is, it may not be that massive one big career fair where it's across all industries. Maybe it's more efficient to do that, but I think smaller, more focused, more industry focused, maybe by company size, I don't know. But I think there are ways of doing some more in-person, that's not like these massive, huge events that are like, I don't know how many people go through that MIT career fair, but I think there will be some options, and we'll think creatively and innovatively and see what works.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Here's another question from one of our guests from Romania, and I'm so excited to see people from all over the world joining us, because this is such a global issue, not just a pandemic, but within higher education. And the question is, what are the processes that are being changed due to the crisis would you keep in the near future? So what you've seen in the spring semester, now getting into summer, what are you seeing that you say, that's good, I think we'll hold on to that one?
I love this question, and I feel like I had answers to this, but now I do feel like we've always provided this high touch experience to our students, but we even went like ultra high touch because of when we had to go online and people were leaving campus, and people felt really like there was angst just over the situation, but just like sadness too, that it was like such an abrupt close. So we really did a lot to weekly check-ins with our students that really I have these amazing relationships with my students that I may not have had otherwise. And I don't want that to go away. I want to keep that, in play. And because where you might think relationships just kind of go away, we were actually able to use the situation to foster them and make them stronger. And I think that's going to build much stronger connections after our students graduate. Some of them have graduated last week, but I think that's going to be a stronger connection to MIT longer term. And so that's not really answering the question, but I also think that there will be opportunities for maybe, continued blended classrooms as well. Maybe not every topic needs to be, front and center in the classroom. So I don't know. I don't, again, great question. I don't have the answer. I mean, this is all, we're still just trying to get through with what we need to accomplish, but there definitely will be some positives that come out of this.
I agree. And I think you said to me once, don't let a good crisis go to waste, right? So look for, we know the expression, if you get lemons, make lemonade. I say, if things fall into crumbs, make crumb cake. And we're all living on a good breakfast of lemonade and crumb cakes recently. Yeah. So one of the things that I found, in fact, one of the recent webinars we did, and these are all recorded on the company YouTube channel, but Michael Peltz, an award-winning journalist, was on, and Mike's a good friend of mine as well. And we were talking about effective remote communication skills. And he said, one of the things is when you're doing a video call with somebody, you're in their home. There is a level of almost professional intimacy, if I can use that term, of getting to know someone a little bit better. Oh, what kind of dog is that you have? Sounds like a big one. We're hearing dogs bark, and we hear maybe a child in the background. We see what people have in their homes. There's another element. You mentioned getting to know your student a little bit. There is a peek into someone's life that's the non-sterile classroom or auditorium environment. And I think that can be a real positive that comes from that also. having the best of both worlds going forward, I think may be something that I would keep in the future. There is an element of this that I think is very effective.
It's funny, just to build on that, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll do it quickly. But our students, they actually really enjoy seeing like Nobel laureate Professor Merton teaching from his living room. Like that was like, they're like, wow, I would never think of him. And it makes him almost like, of course he's human, but it like kind of brought him down to like, and other faculty down to like, wow, these are like real people. They have real homes.
Yes.
So
On the
flip side for me, when I'm like calling a student on Zoom and they're in their bedroom and I see their bed and unmade bed and dirty closet, I'm like, yeah, too much information. So
there's always stories like that. We don't have time probably to go into those. But Heidi, let's do this. We've gone through the questions. Just for the audience, just so you know, we have another webinar. This series has been very popular. We started this in April as a way to say, okay, let's provide some value during this. Again, my company, Section 810, focuses on helping people enhance their communication skills. And so we wanted to provide some help in the areas surrounding the pandemic. So we've gone through a number of sessions now. In a couple of weeks, we have a new session that was just scheduled, and that is on how to enhance your digital profile with LinkedIn. So the registration page is not up just yet, but feel free to check that out and join us for that one in a couple of weeks where we have an expert joining on that topic. Heidi, before we close out, any final comments or parting thoughts from you?
Well, first of all, I have to thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and thank you to all the attendees who took time out of their day to participate. I hope there was some good takeaways. If nothing else, this is a situation that we're still learning how to deal with it. I know we will all get through it stronger, and I think there's going to be some great innovative approaches that that will survive this, and we'll look back and hopefully see the positives and not just the negatives of this horrible pandemic.
I agree, and I hope the same. One things I've learned both personally and through working with so many colleagues and friends, we are adaptive as a people. The human race is adaptive, and we're finding ways to make the best of things. So higher education affects so many of us, and Heidi, I have the utmost respect for you personally, and I count it a privilege to have you join me today. The MIT program is second to none, and always had a great time working with you on that professional level. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us and share your wealth of knowledge with the audience. To those of you, again, that have joined us today, thank you for investing an hour of your time with us. Feel free to follow up and reach out with questions to me. You'll be getting a follow-up email regarding the upcoming events that we have. And as always, it's a pleasure to chat with all of you. Stay safe, stay well, and we look forward to speaking again. Bye, everyone.